This is the Blood Red Podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
It's the Blood Red Podcast, courtesy of the Liverpool Echo. Following a turbulent week, the Reds return to home comforts ahead of the visit of Sheffield United. I'm Guy Clarke. Welcome along as we get set to preview the weekend's action. Chris Wilder's blunted blades make the trip to Merseyside with a certain Rhian Brewster looking to cut through on his return to Anfield. Could Jurgen Klopp have Joel Matip to call upon as the Reds continue to strive for their answer to their Van Dijk void? And as Liverpool look to put on a box office showing at Anfield, it's pay-per-view as opposed to bums on seats for Reds fans. Alongside me for this Friday edition of Blood Red, pleasure to have our chief LFC writer, Ian Doyle. Doyley, how are we?
Oh, okay, yourself?
Not so bad. And also with the Tall Paul Gorst not with us, our pocket rocket, Dan Kay. Dan, how are you?
I'm not quite as tall as Paul, but I'm all right. Yes, thank you.
Are you as tall as Paul? If I was going to say, if two of you were to stand on top of your shoulders, do you reckon you'd be there then?
Maybe there or thereabouts, but I've got a bit of spring, as anyone who's seen me play five-a-side, so I'd still fancy my chances of beating Gorsty in the air. But
he's a bit lumbering when it comes to the aerial threat.
I was going to say, he's one of them tall players, isn't he? He falls into that category. Not actually much use in the air, but...
on the ground. So.
Yeah, you said it when he's not here. Anyway, let's get into things then and kick things off. Doyle, come to you first. And sort of just thought I'd start with your reactions to the week that Liverpool have had. It has been some week, obviously, all of the Van Dijk fallout. We're not going to spend too much time sort of dwelling on that. Klopp's rather spiky press conference ahead of Ajax, and then, of course, the win in midweek as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll start with the win. Thought it was a very good win. Thought, considering everything that had gone on in the week, as you just mentioned with Van Dijk, not just that, but Matip wasn't fit, was he? Thiago wasn't there. There was a bit of a distraction with some of the stuff that happened after the derby. This, that, and the other. So, and of course, it was a hard game anyway. Even if Liverpool would have had everybody fit, then it would have still been not. I don't think it was the hardest game they're going to get in the group. That'll be in Atalanta in a couple of weeks' time, but. To get that win and to get that clean sheet, I mean, Klopp himself said, look, it was all about the win. It's always, you learn more when you have these kind of scrappy, dirty wins, I think he actually called it. I think, Liverpool, they couldn't argue too much. I mean, the other way of looking at it is that they got beat 7-2 by Aston Villa, earlier this month? And in the two games that they've just played since then, they've only been one really dodgy VAR decision away from winning at Everton, the leaders, and winning at Ajax. So, that's not too bad when you consider, as we say, some of the other stuff that's happened. Just on Van Dijk, it looks like we knew he was going to be out for a while, but I think since we last did a podcast, he's gone and seen the specialist, and he's not had his operation yet. But from everything that Jurgen Klopp's saying, he said it today. He said we don't want to know how long he's out for. It's almost as if he's saying, yeah, well, we know it's going to be ages, and we just don't want to hear that it's going to be ages. So, I think. They're just going to be planning now for probably the rest of the season without him, and in that sense, getting a clean sheet at Ajax was a good start.
Yeah, is that the best way to go about the Van Dijk stuff? Just to draw a line under it, Dan, with the fact that you to all intents and purposes, plan for the season without him from here?
What alternative is there? You know what I mean? Obviously, it's a hammer blow. In 35 years of watching Liverpool, I've not seen too many players have a more transformative effect than Virgil van Dijk. There's somewhat ironic that this should happen against Everton because obviously he had a fairy tale start against the Toffees on his debut in the FA Cup nearly 3 years ago when he scored on his debut. But, this Liverpool team has not been built around one player, whether it's Mo Salah or Virgil van Dijk or Jordan Henderson or Alisson Becker. And Liverpool have to be realistic. There's no point bellyaching or moaning about it or crying over spilled milk. However aggrieved, rightly or wrongly, Liverpool might feel by what went down at Goodison on Saturday, it's gone. And there's no point harking back to it. Liverpool have some very, very good players in the squad and, may well look to bolster the defensive options in January because obviously they took a little bit of a gamble in not replacing Lovren in the summer. And obviously you could argue that slightly come back to bite them. But, it was always felt one of the reasons why they wanted to bring Thiago in was that it would possibly free up Fabinho to cover at the back more. And I think, I'm sure I read before that the 4 games that Fabinho's played centre-back for Liverpool so far, we haven't actually conceded a goal yet. Now, that's probably not going to last forever, but I think his performance is in that position so far, and particularly at Ajax on Wednesday night when I thought he was terrific, shows that Liverpool have still got a lot to look forward to, a lot to be ebullient about and positive about. I made the point to somebody earlier in the week that, Liverpool made a mockery of that league last year, won it by 18 points, and realistically, it probably could and should have been more if they hadn't won it so early with 7 games to spare and eased off. So in some ways, maybe this just evens it up a bit. I still don't think anybody's better than Liverpool. It's maybe now more of a level playing field, but Liverpool needs to just remember how good we are, how much we proved to ourselves on and off the pitch, that this is a side that can handle knockbacks, and just crack on.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it, Doyle? Because I know he was obviously angry when he did the press conference on Tuesday. Jurgen Klopp took exception, I think, to quite an early question, sort of one of those where it was what Gini Wijnaldum had said was put back at him. He doesn't seem to sort of like those questions that are put to him. But he sort of mentioned within that at the time that it was almost 3 weeks ago when City lost to Leicester, I thought we'd won the league. And now you're all saying that we've got no chance whatsoever. The truth lies somewhere between them. As Dan said, Liverpool still are reigning champions, probably on paper, still the best team in the Premier League, albeit it is going to be harder than perhaps it would have been before.
I mean, that's to some extent, that's the media being reactive. And I know we're kind of guilty of that a little bit, although I like to think that we're a bit more considered about how we respond to certain results. But, we've done the results thing before, haven't we? Liverpool lost 7-2 at Aston Villa. United lost 6-1 at home to Tottenham. Tottenham lost at home to Everton. Are any of those out of the running for the title? Of course they're not. I would imagine, with the possible exception of Fulham, who are absolutely awful, by the way, that everybody else has still probably got a chance because they've only played 4 or 5 games. It's absolutely ages to go. There's nothing to suggest that Liverpool are going to be anything other than in the top 2, top 3. They'll be challenging for the title. Obviously, losing Van Dijk is a massive blow because he's the best defender in the world, in the same way that Alisson Becker is arguably the best goalkeeper in the world. And Liverpool, without both of those at Ajax, still got a clean sheet. So you can't complain too much with that. I just think it is going to be a season that's going to take a long time to settle because teams are going to be affected by the run of games, the spread of coronavirus. Liverpool have been affected by that, haven't they? They've had about 4. Certainly, we know 3 players who've tested positive. Or at least we think it's 3. There may well be more because they're not duty bound to come. It's up to the individual. Liverpool have that policy where they say it's up to the individual whether they want to let people know, make it public. So this is going to happen not just to Liverpool. It's going to happen to all of the clubs. So there is going to be that kind of sense of. Yeah, it's going to be a lot less settled than it was last season. As Dan said, Liverpool were amazing last year. They're not going to win the league. No one's going to win the league by 18 points this year. I've said it many a time at the start of the season. Someone will lose 6 or 7 games and they'll win it. Liverpool just have to make sure that they're still in and around. Oh, we've lost Dan. In and around, and just have to make sure that they're still there. Losing Van Dijk is a massive blow. But as shown with Fabinho, as Dan said, they brought Thiago in to possibly free in Fabinho to play centre-back. This is what's happened, and Fabinho has shown that he can do a job. That what's interesting for me, what is interesting from what happened on Wednesday, is that Fabinho seems as though he was the senior centre back. It was as though Joe Gomez, hi Dan, it was as though Joe Gomez was feeding off him rather than the other way around. And I think we have seen that a little bit before. Whether or not Gomez feels as though he quite has the same level of experience, I don't know, but I think, as I said on Monday, it will be interesting for him because you'd like to think that with teams no longer just targeting him and targeting both centre-backs with Van Dijk on, it might make life a little bit easier for him in that sense. And it may allow him to build up the leadership qualities that perhaps he hasn't had already, not because he can't have them, but because he hasn't had to.
Yeah, no, certainly on that point that Doyle was making just before, Dan, about likelihood is a team maybe could lose 6 or 7 games in the Premier League and still win it this season. Obviously, Liverpool only dropped 15 points all of last season, already dropped 5. I suppose that really, in terms of sort of averages of points dropped through the season already, is showing that probably is going to prove to be the case.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think it was always going to be the case, even before Van Dijk, even before the unusual nature of this season, with everything being so compressed because of the pandemic and whatever. What Liverpool and Manchester City achieved over the last couple of years is freakish. It's never happened before. It may well never happen again. So that won't. I wouldn't imagine that's going to dilute Liverpool's motivation or their kind of the drive that we've seen day after day. They're still going to go out and aim to win every game, but Liverpool were conditioned because of Manchester City's relentlessness over the last couple of years of knowing that every draw felt like a defeat. And I suppose it's a different type of mentality now. I think every team tries to win every match they play. Of course they do. But I think when the bad results happen, and obviously Liverpool have already had 1 or 1.5, if you want, however you want to perceive the Everton result. To me, that was one of the most encouraging things about Saturday. Obviously, it was disappointing the way it panned out with the disallowed goal and Van Dijk and the injuries and whatever. But by and large, it was Liverpool turned up. Liverpool put in a performance. On another day, they could quite easily have walked away from Goodison Park with 3 points and a handsome victory. And that to me, but I always think the worst time to have a bad result is before an international break, because you've got 2 weeks to stew on it, and very little time to actually try and remedy what went wrong in training. The players that they basically only had 1 training session last Friday, didn't they? But the performance that they put in, even if it didn't really get what it deserved at the end of the match, I think said to me that yes, this Liverpool team, accept that things are different now, but will have that resilience to bounce back from setbacks, whether it's a bad result or a bad injury or whatever, and keep going, because they are elite level in terms of ability and mentality. And I think they've proved that again this week, because not just on Saturday, it was a really good performance against Ajax on Wednesday, against a decent side who I think will cause a fair few other teams problems this season.
Yeah, well, let's get into the team news then for Saturday's game. We know, of course, Virgil van Dijk's out, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain and Kostas Tsimikas also out, but question marks over the likes of Alisson, Becker, Joel Matip and Thiago Alcantara, which Jurgen Klopp was asked about in his pre-match press conference, and here's what he had to say.
Look, in my situation, actually, I don't want to rule anybody out until somebody tells me. And so far, nobody told me. Maybe I should have listened better, but for me, everybody apart from the 3 I mentioned is in contention until somebody tells me different.
Well, that seems to be quite encouraging, doesn't it, Doyle? That we thought Alisson Becker certainly was going to be out for a stretch of time, but Jurgen Klopp there saying that until someone tells him, he's going to maybe consider him for selection.
I'm starting to think whether he's just forgotten to add him onto that list of players who might not be available, to be honest. And whether he did it on purpose or not as an accident, he has kind of let something slip there. I mean, we knew that Alisson was back in some sort of individual training, whether that was the end of this time last week or the start of this week. But his injury was a collision, wasn't it, on the training ground, shoulder injury. It didn't need any surgery, so that suggested it wasn't massively serious. And Liverpool never actually came out and said how long he was going to be out for. They said, we're not going to put any time scale on this. It was reported at the time it was going to be 6 weeks, and what's it been now? 3. So, I mean, I'd be surprised if he did play, because while Adrian has been a bit up and down when he's played just in the course of a game. I mean, look at the game on Wednesday, which he started pretty terribly by tackling Joe Gomez, then hitting a clearance against somebody, ending it by not punching the ball properly and almost giving away an equaliser. But in between, he makes a great save, and he did pretty well with dealing with the threat that Ajax had in between. So that was kind of his career in a nutshell, really. But having said that, Alisson is such a good goalkeeper that is it worth the risk though? Because of Liverpool having so many games coming up, I would be surprised if he played. Although having said that, it's we're going to mention Rhian Brewster at some point. Liverpool coming up against him, he'll have a point to prove. It'll be interesting on Saturday. But in terms of Alisson, I'd be surprised if he played. With the others, we'll only really know on the day of the game, to be honest, because I think they're doing a training session on Friday afternoon, well, just now actually. So Jurgen Klopp said obviously then that anybody who's in training will be considered, anybody who's not won't be. So he'll know then, and we'll know then. He said in the past, hasn't he? He said it again today that at the moment he's very much in thrall with what the medical staff are telling him, which to some of us old timers is a little bit like a throwback to Roy Hodgson and Peter Bruckner, if you remember that, Dan. Yeah, where it seemed as though, he seemed as though he was running the team at one moment. But I think there's a better relationship between the medical staff and Jurgen Klopp and his coaching team. You saw that on Wednesday when he said afterwards Jordan Henderson could play 45 minutes, so decided that he could play the second 45 minutes. So I think just go with that. I mean, for all of Liverpool's injury problems, they've still got quite a bit of strength in depth in certain areas. So I don't see any reason to risk anybody if they're not 100%.
Is that the thing that we've got to be wary of as well, Dan, is with obviously it being Van Dijk who's injured and Alisson the last couple of seasons now having picked up these niggly injuries at times when Liverpool could really do without, that we almost don't become paranoid and sort of think too much into the fitness all the time of the defenders and who's available and who isn't, and effectively just trust those who obviously are within the building if they are needed to deputise. That's exactly what they're there for.
Well, 100% right. And I think this season more than ever, that is going to be the case because, again, because of the compressed nature of the season, with all these games wedged back to back, I think we're going to be reliant on the squad more than ever. Certainly in this period between now and Christmas, when apart from the international break in November, it's literally League Europe every week, isn't it? And until the end of the year, and I would imagine that part of the mindset and the planning the manager and his backroom team will operate on is that they don't want to wait until people get injured before they have to put the other lot in. And it's a very, very fine balance about how do you judge when someone's getting near to the red, what do they call it, the red zone, when they're going to be more susceptible to pulling muscles. I mean, obviously they've got incredible data and science and sports science behind it now, where they can monitor this type of thing. But however clued up they are, it's never an exact science, is there? We've all seen numerous examples where two players can go 300 miles an hour into each other and both walk away without a scratch. And then someone can jump for a header, completely innocuous, and can do his ankle ligaments. That's the nature of football. Do you know what I mean? The injuries, unfortunately, are part and parcel of the game. And because the likes of Alisson, the likes of Van Dijk have been such huge figures, because maybe I think for a long time Liverpool supporters were a little bit scarred because of maybe some of the goalkeepers and defenders they had who weren't really up to scratch. And obviously since these two lads have come in, and as good as they are, and they've helped drive Liverpool to the top of the game, I think probably we have put them up on a pedestal a little bit. The reality is, Adrian is probably as good a second choice goalkeeper as you're going to get, and as probably for many teams, probably as good a first choice goalkeeper as you can get. You can't clone Alisson, you can't clone Van Dijk, so we have to put our trust in these players and our trust in the manager and his staff to make the right decisions to hopefully keep them at the optimal level of fitness to be able to cope with the demands upon them.
I don't want to jinx things, and if I do here, then obviously I'm the man to blame when it comes to Monday's podcast, Doyle. But Sheffield United do only have 2 goals so far this season. I was going to say if there is a game in which to bring Alisson back, would this be it? Because they do have a threat from set pieces. They will probably try and target Liverpool's defensive area and put the ball, as it were, into the mixer. So is it therefore Alisson that you sort of do try and get back for this game, or do, as Dan was sort of saying, you trust in Adrian, and in fact it's the selection dilemma which you've got more in front of the goalkeeper, as it were, as to who plays at centre half?
Well, that's the interesting thing for me just generally with Liverpool, is that Van Dijk was clearly the one Liverpool defender who could head it. And as much as he's great at passing this, that and the other and tackling and reading the game, his ability to head it is the one thing that's made the biggest difference. Don't think Matip might be tall, but he's got a little bit of a 50p head, I'm afraid. Joe Gomez, his heading isn't his strong point. Fabinho is fairly decent, to be fair. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why Klopp's been quite happy for him to drop back into central defence. So I tell you what, it'll be interesting when Matip comes back, if it is this weekend. But how many games Klopp decides to play actually Matip with Gomez, because it may be Fabinho on one of the other ones. I mean, we obviously don't know, and there will obviously be some games, I'd imagine, where Fabinho has to move into midfield or is rested, because, as Dan said, there's so many games coming up. But in terms of that, so you've lost Van Dijk, and Alisson is quite strong in terms of coming off his line and commanding his area, as it were. Although he hasn't had to do that much with Van Dijk being there, and this is what the point I was trying to make, is that whether it's Alisson or it's Adrian, maybe the goalkeepers are going to have to be told, look, for the next foreseeable future, you're going to have to start coming off your line a little bit and clearing the ball out, because you can punch it. Obviously, we can't. And it's better to have that kind of decisiveness. It goes back to the days of Bruce Grobbelaar. Daniel remembers that he would just, I think he basically got told, just come for everything. And if you don't get it sometimes, we'll try and clear it off the line. And sometimes that would end up with conceding a goal because he's made a mistake. But the amount of chances that he then avoided just by being decisive and coming out and getting it and getting a hand on it or whatever have you, then that paid off in the end. As you can see from Liverpool winning that many trophies when he was playing. So I do wonder whether or not the goalkeepers will be asked to do something different. But in sense, going back to the Sheffield United game, yeah, they do have a lot of threat at set pieces. They haven't scored many goals this season, as you said, but Rhian Brewster's this. Normally he would be the kind of X factor, but obviously Liverpool know all about him. So it'll be interesting to see how Sheffield United. I can't imagine Brewster won't start, I'll be honest. Cannot imagine. Why wouldn't you? He'd be absolutely desperate, not to prove a point against his former team, but just to show, this is why I'm worth £23 million or whatever it was that Sheffield United paid for him. And he'll want to make a good start. And actually, playing at Anfield is still unusual for him because he didn't make that many appearances for Liverpool. But as I said before about the goalkeeping situation, purely on the basis of the fact there's so many games coming up and the fact that Sheffield United may decide to, at set pieces at least, because they're not a long ball team by any imagination. They do have a lot of height. So that means that set pieces and corners, they are dangerous. So do you want to risk Alisson getting an injury again just by pushing him in about 3 or 4 days earlier than he should have been? I'm not sure.
No, we'll have to wait and see how that one plays out then. Dan, in front of the goalkeeper then, what's the thinking for you? A bit like Doyle, is it maybe even after just a few cameos there, Fabinho and one other, or is it a case of needing to wrap Joel Matip up in cotton wool between games and try and get him out as often as possible? He hasn't got a good record, whether it be putting back-to-back games together or even at the moment, I think it's over a year now, of getting through 90 minutes.
Yeah, I think realistically, you're not going to see Matip playing too many games back-to-back. There is a danger, though, if you put too much, if you insist it's going to be Fabinho plus one every other game, are you putting too much? Is he going to be able to play, 12 games in 6 weeks or whatever it is? It's, Klopp is going to, obviously there's the fullback situation as well. Liverpool's, the way Liverpool's fullbacks attack is obviously a fundamental aspect of the way the team plays. But a lot of that was based on having Van Dijk there, with his ability to screen the back four and giving them that extra bit of cover. So do they now need to drop a little bit deeper? And if they do, does that mean, particularly again with the games being so compressed, that you can start to mix them up a bit? So does Nico Williams get the odd game here and there? Do you throw Milner in at left back just to get him on the pitch on occasion, to give the likes of Andy Robertson, who played virtually every game last season and did look kind of like he was blowing for tugs a little bit towards the end? Bearing in mind Matip didn't play in midweek, I would be inclined to throw him back in at the weekend without disrespecting them. It is Midtjylland at home on Tuesday, isn't it? Am I right in saying? Yeah, which you would have to think is going to be the kind of like the deadest rubber of the group. And if Klopp does want to kind of rotate a little bit and get a bit of rest in legs, he could conceivably look to do it then. But bearing in mind Liverpool have now gone shock horror 2 league games without a win, which in the modern era is crisis territory really. I think it'll be looking. I think Sheffield United got 1 point from 5 games. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, they're sitting second bottom of the table. Yeah, with 1 point from 5 games.
They've had a lousy start to the season, but they did very well last season. They got some good players, and as we know, these runs can end as quick as they started. So Liverpool can't take them for granted. But I'd be inclined to bring Matip back in, maybe even give Fabinho a bit of a rest. And I think what Doyle said before, Van Dijk's absence does give Joe Gomez the chance to, in the same way, I think, going back a few years, we always felt that Jordan Henderson maybe wasn't quite the same player when Steven Gerrard was around. In Gerrard's absence, Henderson stepped up and felt he had to assume that extra responsibility and did so. And the same may well apply to Gomez. So while he's had a bit of a checkered injury past as well, I think more of Gomez's injuries by and large have been more contact injuries, haven't they, rather than muscular. So while at the same time we can't flog him into the ground either, I think I'd probably go Gomez and Matip tomorrow.
Is there also, though, flip it on its head, and rather than talk about the defensive side of the game, Doyle, even more onus maybe on the attacking players to get the goals, and even if the, I suppose, defensive shape within games, maybe they don't play quite so high and almost in a way draw opposition onto them, it will maybe get back to that sort of classic Liverpool counter-attacking goal of Salah running in behind, and because it seems to have been a long time since really you've seen Mane and Salah really have that chance to get really in behind an opposition, as opposed to them sitting so deep that Liverpool then have to go about breaking them down in another way.
I suppose so, but I don't think Sheffield United is going to be a game where that'll be happening. I think they'll just be coming to sit deep. They're not going to leave any gaps behind them. And it will be interesting to see. We'll get to the team, selection a bit later on. But who does play up front? Because, Klopp made that big call of replacing all three of them on 59 minutes on Wednesday, which, while it's not unusual to see, I think I worked it out, there's only been 4 times in the last 18 months that the three of them have started and finished the same game, which is a bit of a surprise because, well, in some ways it makes sense because Liverpool have won most of those games and one of them will get substituted towards the end to save their legs for the next game. So in that sense, that's been quite good. But it's only been, I think it was 4 or 5 times in the past where they've all gone off in the same game and never before at the same time. But the fact is, the 3 who came on, certainly Diogo Jota and Takumi Minamino, those 2 have been, I think, have been very unlucky not to have started more games this season. I think with so many games coming up, certainly with the 3 at home, I think they'll all start, both of those will start at least one, if not more. And it gives Liverpool a chance to give that front 3 a breather. And on top of that, it also gives the opposition something different because they won't have come up against the Liverpool team with Minamino and Jota because everybody knows they've got all these plans for Salah, Firmino and Mane. While, as we can see from the results, hardly anybody's been able to cope with it. It does give people a bit of a head start in terms of how they want to deal with Liverpool's front 3. But if they've got 3 others, even Jota in particular, I think has been very good since he's come in. He's surprised me. He's certainly been a slightly different player to the one I saw at Wolves, but then that's partly because of the way Wolves play. And it's again a case of so far that you sign players who are going to fit into your system and play the way that you want to play. And just because they haven't done that somewhere else doesn't mean they can't do it for your team. So Liverpool, they said they've been tracking him for 2 or 3 years. They must have seen something in his game, just his overall, the way that he approaches the game that's going to fit in with them. And what was interesting for me, and we've mentioned this before, but when he signed, there was talk like, he can play across the front 3. And with Minamino, he can play across the front 3. When Klopp was asked, I think it was after the Lincoln game, I think it was earlier this season. And he basically got asked, what do you think, where are these going to play? And he said, Jota's on the left and Minamino's down the centre. As if to say, right, they are the replacements for, not replacements, but they can rotate for Mane and can rotate for Firmino. And that's what happened on Wednesday. And I'd imagine we might see that from the start, whether that's on Saturday against Sheffield United or a game coming up.
Yeah, I'm going to go bold when we do our team selections. You've talked me into it there of how I'll set the Reds out, but we'll wait until we get to that. Before we talk any more about the Reds, let's talk about a former Red and a man who could well make his full Premier League debut at Anfield. Maybe this time last year we would have thought it would have been for Liverpool. It looks, Doyle, as though it may well be against Liverpool at Anfield. Of course, we are talking about Rhian Brewster. You alluded to it before. Chris Wilder said that he is pushing for a start, and as you said before, you'd be amazed if he didn't, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'd be amazed if he didn't. There's no reason to not play him. I think Sheffield United, as we've pointed out, struggling for goals, and I think while they did well last season, they've done terribly since we came back from lockdown in June. They finished the season really poorly, fell out of reckoning for Europe. They were about to do but they were reckoning for the Europa League place. In fact, top 5, wasn't it? So I wouldn't say they were pushing for top 4, but they were, they were kind of in and around, but then they just fell away massively. And this season they've started poorly. And Chris Wilder did an interview, didn't he, yesterday, where he says, "Look, we've got, I think it's John Fleck, John O'Connell, and Moussa, striker." Yeah, he said that basically they're all injured, and it's just as bad as for me. This is him speaking, not me. For me, losing Van Dijk because he's an important player for Liverpool, and these 3 players are important for our team. So, because of all of that, there's no sense in not starting Brewster. Because another thing is he'll know the pitch. He won't be intimidated. I know there's nobody there, but some players do get intimidated playing in bigger arenas, especially if there's preferably if there was people there. But it still can affect people. But he'll have no fear. And he'll be keen to make up for lost time because he'll think that since he came back from the loan spell at Swansea, that he's been absolutely burst into play. He got 11 in 22 there. He'll be desperate to get out there and play. And of course, the last action he had was, for Liverpool, was missing that penalty in the Community Shield. So it wasn't the best way for him to go out. But I don't, Klopp said it, didn't he? In his press conference today, he said, he's our boy. Then he had to stop himself and went, well, actually, no, he's not. He's not our boy. But we'll always think of him as being like that because that's the kind of relationship he has with his players. You look at the players he's had at Mainz, the players he had at Dortmund, and he's still in contact with the likes of Goetze and Royce and people like that, and probably all of them, to be honest. And he'll be like that with these Liverpool players who've played, whether they've played hardly any games like Brewster, or they've played hundreds of games like Jordan Henderson.
Yeah, as Doyle was saying there, I've dug it out actually. The league table, when the football was suspended, Sheffield United was 7th on 43 points. They were only 5 points off 4th place Chelsea, and they did have a game in hand. So, they haven't done well since sort of lockdown. They did finish 9th in the end last season, but only scored 39 goals in their 38 games, Dan. It's clear to see why they were so sort of willing to pay the money that they did for Rhian Brewster.
Absolutely. I mean, I do. One of the games I do remember watching in the early part of lockdown was when they beat Chelsea 3-0 at Bramall Lane, which was kind of pitched as kind of like, a big game in the race for top four. And when they beat them so convincingly, I remember kind of thinking, well, good on them. I mean, they've got as good a chance as anyone of getting in. It may well be that was pretty much one of the only games they won in lockdown, and obviously since then, because they haven't had a win yet this season. It seems like they're suffering from that, the chronic second season, second album syndrome, which maybe has kicked in a little bit early for them at the end of last season. But they were one of the kind of the more appealing stories of last season. I think when they got promoted, I think most people expect them to be struggling down the bottom of the table. But the way they went about their business, Chris Wilder is a local lad, a Blades fan. Just seems very, very down to earth and no airs and graces to him. And I do remember, not just because he said nice things about us, when they came to Anfield on the 2nd of January, I think, didn't they? Which I didn't. I was covering the game from the office that night, but I do remember him being very, speaking very, very, not just respectfully, but very realistically about because by this point Liverpool were 20 gazillion points clear at the top of the league or whatever, but obviously still didn't have it in the bag. And I think they got a lot of goodwill from a lot of neutrals last season, Sheffield United. But football is a cruel, unforgiving game. You're only as good as your last match, and they're obviously finding it really, really difficult to get themselves started this season. I do think Bruce is going to be good for them. Klopp always made it very clear what a very, very high regard he had for him. The last couple of pre-seasons he was talking him up big time, and I think we all hoped and expected to see a bit more of him in the first team. The fact that even though Liverpool have let him go, the deal that he's gone away with, I think I remember somebody using the expression, it's almost like an enhanced loan deal, in that essentially Liverpool can call them back at any point if they want for a set fee over the next couple of years. So I think that shows that they haven't quite written him off and still expect him to have a good future in the game. And I think most Liverpool fans will wish him well in doing that, but after tomorrow night.
Yeah, I think Jurgen Klopp said, didn't he, that he hopes that over the course of a 38-game season, if he played all of them, he'd have 36 good ones and 2 days off, and was hoping that obviously they would be the two against Liverpool. Before we get to our team selections, then, this was going to be the weekend that Liverpool were hoping to welcome fans back to Anfield. Obviously, the situation we're in, that isn't the case. Doyle, you're going to be at Anfield tomorrow for the game, but Reds fans are going to have to make do with pay-per-view. I suppose it will be one of those occasions where it probably doesn't get any easier going to Anfield and not seeing fans and getting used to that, but I suppose it will be more poignant tomorrow when the sides come out and there is no crowd there.
Yeah, as you say, it's funny, the last game, when was the last Liverpool game at home? I can't even remember.
It was in the league, it was against Arsenal, it was 4 weeks ago on Monday.
Is that really was? Yeah. I think wow. I think when it was that game or the Arsenal game in the League Cup, which they won very luckily, as you'll know, Guy. Yeah. There were signs outside the ground on like the columns and the bollards saying "Welcome back, we've missed you," because they'd already put in the preparations in for fans being back for this game, Sheffield United game, and I know they'd done a few, rehearsals in terms of setting up. I think there was going to be two kind of like welcoming areas behind the two stands behind the goals, and fans be filtered in, all this kind of stuff. And there's possibly some suggestion that they were going to use ticketless games just to get people into the stadiums. Obviously, it wouldn't be 50,000; it'd be more like 10 or 11. But that's still 10 or 11,000 more than nobody, which I can tell you would make an absolutely massive difference. Because from a personal point of view, I'm not exactly looking forward to watching these games in a freezing cold staying with nobody there. It's one thing watching them during the summer and the autumn months where it's not been particularly cold, if we're being honest. But as anyone who's been up in the main stand where we're at the moment, it gets a bit cold. So it just doesn't. That's where it'll be a struggle when the weather's poor, where it's cold, when it gets really windy at Anfield, as well as anybody, the enemy of football. But all of this makes a difference when the fans are there. But I know you're going to ask me about the pay-per-view and the whole thing about $14.95. And my view is that I can understand why they can't give away the games forever, because it detracts. It'll devalue the TV deal they have in place, and then Sky and BT will be like, well, hang on, why are we paying for this when all of the games are going to end up being on television? Why are we paying this much money for it? Which I can get that to a point, because in the end, but they must know it's not going to go on forever. Be amazed if it's like this time next year, for example. I'd imagine by the start of next season they'll have found a way. In fact, I actually think fans will be back in sooner than people think, probably in very small numbers. Because you looked around on the Champions League this week, and last night Arsenal played in front of fans. Where was it? Austria, yeah, against.
There was loads at Rennes on Wednesday.
Yeah, and I think was Leipzig had fans as well, didn't they? Because I remember watching the highlights of their game and they celebrate in front of their fans. So they are coming in.
Quite a few.
Yeah, so there are games where it's happening, and so it will happen at some point, and it'll be, as I say, it'll happen sooner rather than later. But pay-per-view, £14.95. I can see why people are actively seeking to boycott it, because it is about price point. If somebody had said, I don't know, if somebody said £5, I would imagine everyone would have gone, yeah. If somebody had said, it's funny, is it £9.95 and we'll give half of it to the lower league clubs, everybody would have gone, yeah, all right. Even if I just think it's going into those four figures, £14.95 for a game of football where all the other bits and bobs that you like about football, going to the game, being around your mates, sampling the atmosphere, actually getting up there, being around the ground, even afterwards, then joining in all the discussion. As from anybody who's covered these games, the two weirdest parts of it when there's no one in there is the start, because it's dead quiet, and then the final whistle where it's just completely quiet. There's none of that kind of anticipation. The teams walk out to no noise whatsoever, and then they'll stand around, and then they'll do the little line, and then the awful Premier League anthem will come on. Why they've changed it, I don't know. It's absolutely horrific. And then when the game finishes, there'll be a little referee will whistle. There might be one or two claps from people. Everyone just gets off. It's so weird. It's like there's none of that kind of buzz or anything. It's almost as if nothing happened. And it's weird. I don't want to mention rugby league again. I know that you're not particularly interested, but in St Helens, where I live, a couple of weeks ago, they had the Cup semi-finals, but at the ground for St Helens, and it was behind closed doors, and there's a huge Tesco next to it. And I was in shopping in Tesco and walked out and just saw the floodlights on and forgot, they're playing massive semi-final games there in front of nobody. It's like no one had any idea of it was even happening. And I think people have got used to that, because it's been, 7 months now? It's come up to more than 7 months since fans have been let in. And my worry is that maybe people are getting a little bit too used to it. There will be people who won't want to go back and watch after all of this. And in some sense, you can't blame them, because possibly they've had a look at how much they're spending on the football. But going back to the £14.95, if it was cheaper, I think there'd be less complaint about it. And if there was a contribution to the overall picture, the bigger picture, for use a buzz phrase, of football, then I don't think anyone would have a problem with it. But for what you get as well, I mean, I believe that there's no commentary, and sometimes
I believe there's commentary. I believe it's commentary, but not presentation around. I think Sky and BT are taking different views. I think BT still is sort of all singing, all dancing, but from my understanding, I haven't paid to watch any of them on pay-per-view, but that Sky effectively just have the commentator with pictures, and then they pick up just before the game. And then
I know Dan feels very strong on this. I just want to make a point before he says his point, is that I think it kind of, and I hate doing this, it kind of split between the people who go the games and the people who don't go the games. And the people who go the games, and I don't just mean the season ticket holders, I mean, even if you go to one game a season or one game every couple of seasons, if you've had that experience, you'll know that paying $14.95 to watch it on television is like, for one game, if it was $14.95 for about four, $14.95 for one game is like, I'm not paying that. And I'm telling you now, if I wasn't going to this game and I didn't have to cover it, I wouldn't be paying $14.95 for it. No chance.
No, it is amazing, isn't it, Dan? And even like when Doyley's saying that, so they're all on the box office, and I get that they're between Sky and BT, but we're told the money is going to the clubs. It's not a case of the broadcasters are keeping it. It was a price point effectively put to the clubs saying, right, it's $14.95 or it's nothing. You're not getting sort of the money in the games on TV. And so that was why, obviously, the vote ended up going 19-1. Leicester City, the only club to vote against this. But it is still so difficult to sort of get around. It would have been great if there had been some sort of idea that they could have put together. I don't know. You pay £20, as Doyle saying, you get the next 4 Liverpool matches that are going to be on TV because it's going to be for the foreseeable, that they then get downloaded onto your box directly. I don't know how that would work. It's not my job, but it really is a difficult one to stomach.
It is, and it's a massively short-sighted decision, I think, by the clubs who were involved in making this. At a time when people are scared, worried, fed up, need football more than ever to give a distraction from the very distressing and uncertain times that we're living in. And unfortunately, the way that this is played out, it leaves the clubs open to accusations of just utter shameless greed. And I don't see how it can be justified in any other way. To be honest, Doyle made a lot of the points that I would have made. I think he hit a lot of the nails squarely on the head. Particularly the fact that it's not just about expecting something for nothing. It was good what they did in after Project Restart and the start of the season, having every game on the usual channels. I think it's important to say not free, because the vast majority of them weren't free. You already needed to have a Sky Sports or BT or Amazon subscription anyway. There was only an absolute handful on free-to-air BBC. But the fact that we're already being deprived of the chance to go to these games, to then be stung for an extra £15 is obscene, really, at a time when people are worried for their jobs, worried for their futures, worried about how they're going to pay their mortgages. They've missed a big opportunity. I think one of the things they could and should have done. I mean, it's all some of the games people wouldn't think twice about paying $14.95 for. But I think some of the ones that have already been on, West Brom against Burnley, without disrespecting clubs like that, I'd imagine some of their diehards would have balked at paying that. The Premier League have said, haven't they, that they're not going to release figures for them, which I think is quite telling. I think that shows that they know that there's something not quite right about what they've done, but they've kind of got themselves into this corner now, and they're probably too proud to back down. Something like what Doyle suggested, whether it was £7 or £8 with a few bob going to the Football League clubs, could have been an option. Another one could have been like a kind of a Netflix type scenario where you maybe pay a £5 or a £10 a month or a weekend, and you get all the extra games as well. But it's just to slap the $14.95 price point on just feels like another kick in the teeth at a time when it feels like the ordinary people of this country are getting them left, right, and centre. I think it's important to make mention, though, as well, that a lot of Saturday's Liverpool's first experience of a pay-per-view in this current scenario, but there's already been 4 or 5 already since from the previous match day, and fan groups of virtually every single Premier League club have voiced their support for a boycott, and a lot of them have already raised tens of thousands of pounds for food banks by donating the $14.95 to food banks or other worthy causes. And that's certainly what I'll be doing tomorrow. They will not be getting my $14.95 to watch Liverpool, which is disappointing to me, because I'm missing the games as it is already, and to not even be able to watch it on the box kind of twist the knife a little bit more. But it's a point of principle. At the end of the day, fans have to make their voices heard. Liverpool fans have done it before, 4.5 years ago when we walked out of the ground against Sunderland, 15,500 of us or whatever it was. And within 24 hours, the club backed down on the £77 price increases. And by the end of the week, literally before the end of the week, with talk from fans groups around the country of similar type of protests, the Premier League announced that from the following season, away match tickets were going to be capped at £30, which was extended earlier last year for another 3 years. So for all people saying, oh, what are you moaning for? You'll never change anything. Well, you can change things by standing up and speaking for what's right. We know about that in this city more than most. So listen, it's a free country. If any Liverpool fans want to go out there and pay it, that's up to you. But I won't be doing it. And I think there's going to be many, many Liverpool fans that believe some things are more important.
I wonder whether or not it's the Premier League kind of covering their own back, in the sense where the reason they're not releasing the numbers is because they know they're going to be really small. They know that fans aren't going to pay. They're just kind of protecting the current TV deal, I think, to a certain degree. And if they make any kind of money off this, any major money off this, I'd be surprised, because it's not going to be the big games that are on anyway. And all the ancillary stuff that they get from people, turning up for the games, let alone paying for the ticket itself, but also buying at the club shop, whatever have you. They're missing out on all of that. So I don't necessarily think that the clubs are expecting to make any kind of money off this. But it is about overall protecting the actual income that they're going to get from the TV deal overall. So what Guy said, if they've been come up to them and said, right, $14.95, you've got to vote on this, I'm not surprised they all just said yeah. But I don't think they necessarily then realise what the backlash would be. And this is going to set this. I'm going to say, I almost think there are probably some people in all of the clubs who's looking at the fans and going, you know what, fair play, don't blame you.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And also EFL clubs, though, with the structure of what they've had throughout the whole pandemic, have been paying £10 per game to watch their matches. So I think as well, maybe there was a bit of a thinking from the Premier League. Well, it's Premier League football.
What's the deal? Do they get? Because I saw Tranmere tweet something. Tranmere just basically put out the precise numbers of how many people pay for their stuff. I mean, did he get everything after 500, or is it everything after 1,000, or everything after a half? I don't understand. There is some kind of
and it's a case of the money, I think, goes to the home team until it gets over. I think if you're an away team, for example, I think you have to have maybe 1,000 people, 500 buy it. I think it's 500 away fans buy it, and then it would go to the away team. Otherwise, it gets split, I think, between the league and the home team or something like that. I don't know the intricacies of it. But anyway, let's move on from the pay-per-view. Let's get back to the game itself, and let's get into our team selections. And this might take a bit of time, so we are running sort of a bit longer than we usually do. But anyway, let's get into our team selections. I think we're all going with Adrian in goal, are we?
I think, we have to. Even if Alisson's fit, I wouldn't be playing him.
I think it has to. You can't take the risk. I'm not going to throw Adrian under the bus, but we need Alisson in this, particularly with Van Dijk missing. We can't afford for Alisson to be missing too many more games this season because he's so important to the mentality and the tone of the team, I think. So, give him a little bit of extra rest, and then hopefully if he's back in for... I'd probably leave until next weekend against West Ham, which West Ham are in decent form, aren't they? So that will not be the gimme that maybe some people might expect.
You could probably put him on the bench just in case Adrian has a complete meltdown.
Yeah, and then that would do him a world of good, bringing him off. Exactly. Again. Anyway, Dan, I'll stick with you for the defence. Who's in the back four? Or are you going to change things up and go with the back three?
No. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if at some point over the season we do see a back three, bearing in mind the paucity of Liverpool's options at centre back. But I don't think we're there yet. So Trent and Robbo at the full-back positions, and I'm going to stick with my idea of giving Fabinho certainly a rest in the defensive role and having Matip and Gomez as the centre-backs.
Doyle?
I'm going to say the same back four as Ajax. No change.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, to be honest. I think that might well be the case. Doyle, come to you for the midfield. Midfield 2 or midfield 3?
It depends on Thiago, I'm going to assume he's not playing. Okay, I'm going to assume he's not playing. Now, Henderson has to start. Milner will definitely not play. And Wijnaldum will play. So there's two. And if you've got Fabinho elsewhere, Oxlade-Chamberlain's injured. Keita's, don't know about Keita. Keita could be back. I'll tell you what then, right? Okay, it'll be Henderson, Wijnaldum, and either Keita or Thiago, whichever one of those can actually walk.
Not Curtis Jones.
Not Curtis Jones. No. I think he's. Having said that, no, not Curtis Jones. No. Oh, well, Curtis Jones only plays if those two can't move. So there you go. Right. But ultimately, basically, I was going to say, well, this is the point. This is the point: is that this team always picks itself from in terms of defence and midfield, depending on who's available. And I'm just going with none of them. If none of them are available, then it has to be Henderson, Wijnaldum, and Curtis Jones. But I think if either of Keita or Thiago are fit, then they play instead of Jones.
Dan, what are you saying?
I don't think you can look past Henderson and Wijnaldum. I mean, given that I haven't put him in defence, I could throw Fabinho into midfield, but I think Fabinho is going to play a hell of a lot of football for us this season, and I think it's important not to flog him too quickly. So I'll give him a rest, and if he's fit, I'd like to see Naby Keita given a go. I think he's been a bit of a slow burner this season. He hasn't had a lot of headlines, but I think there's been a maturity and a kind of a development to his performances. It's unfortunate he's having these little niggly injuries, but if he's fit, I would throw him in because, I mean, Thiago, I haven't talked about him much since Saturday. What a footballer he is. But again, in the same token that we don't want to take any injuries with, any unnecessary risk with injuries, it was a hell of a clobber he got from Alisson. So I'd give him a little bit longer just to get himself back to optimal strength. So I'll Henderson, Wijnaldum, Keita for me.
For me, I'm going to go midfield 2. I think Thiago hopefully has got rid of that knock. It was a heavy, crunching challenge that he was on the receiving end of, but hopefully it looked a lot worse than what it was. And I'm going to go with a 2 of Thiago and Henderson. That would be my midfield 2. Doyle, come to you for your forward 3. Are the three, or are we tinkering?
Well, every single week I've tinkered. I've also changed this front 3 as well, but that's beside the point. Hey, the front 3. Now, I think I've been saying Firmino every single week, and I think it's for his own good. I think I wrote something this week where I think from the start of last season, Salah and Mane have missed or sat out, whether they've been on the bench or injured. They've missed only 4 games of the Premier League and the Champions League, not counting the FA Cup and League Cup, because obviously they missed most of those games. Firmino's played in all of them. And bear in mind that he's also been jetting off to Brazil to play in this, that, and the other. I think, I know they had 3 months not playing, but I don't think any single footballer counts that as a rest because of the mental strain. I think it's fair to say that all of them were still involved in the game, and they were still, if they may not have been running around on the pitch all the time, it was a different kind of stress for them. But even that's been made up by the fact that they played so many games for the end of last season, had a small break, and started again. So Firmino's played a lot of football over the last 18 months. I think it's kind of catching up with him a bit. So I'd have a bit of a change. Jota coming in on the left. I thought he's been very good, as I said before. Whenever he's come in, I really like him. He's been better than I thought he was going to be. Mane, switch him to down the middle, and Salah on the right. So basically it's the front 3 that ended the game against Everton on Saturday.
Dan, what are you saying?
I'm going to go similar but slightly different. I agree. I adore Bobby Firmino as I've gone on about on many occasions. I still think he's got a big part to play for Liverpool this season and possibly next as well. But it's a long season. He needs a rest, and he just needs to kind of just reset and refocus himself a little bit. So I'll take him out the firing line tomorrow. And I agree, Jota's been a revelation. I thought he was terrific when he came on Wednesday night in Holland. So I'm going to have him on the left, and I'm actually going to put Salah in the middle and have Mane on the right.
Yeah, and I'm going 4-2-3-1. So I'm going to have Salah on the right, Minamino in the 10, Jota on the left, and Mane the striker. So Bobby is going to miss out on my team as well. But with their back 3, I think go at them. Put plenty of attacking players on the pitch, and let's see what happens. Let's get a quick score prediction before we go. Then Dan, come back to you for your score prediction.
2-0 Liverpool.
Doyle.
What did I say last week? 23-all. I don't think it'll be that many this week. 18-all? No. 3-1 to Liverpool.
We're not talking about rugby now. So you're going 3-1.
3-1, yeah.
I was going to go 2-0 or 3-1. I'll go 3-0 then. So hopefully,
don't be intimidated by us. You've got your own mind. You've got your own mind.
Yeah, I'm not going for the same scoreline. I could have gone 2-1, but no, I think although maybe there is going to be a 1 in there because Rhian Brewster may well come back and do his thing. But no, I'm going to stick with the clean sheet for Adrian. It's a 3-0 to Liverpool. That's it, though. If you aren't planning to get the box office and the pay-per-view, do make sure that you join us across on the Liverpool Echo. Ian will be at the game. The live blog will be up and running. We'll have all the reaction you could wish for as well from Jurgen Klopp's press conference and plenty more besides. Also have that here on the Blood Red channel as well as our post-game podcast. But until next time, thanks for joining us here on the Blood Red podcast. It's bye for now.
This is the